You're watching TelecomTV's exclusive coverage of the ETSI NFV number 9 meeting here in Prague in the Czech Republic. And I'm joined now by Pradeep Sen, who is the CTO of the Network Functions Virtualization Business Unit at Hewlett-Packard. Thanks very much for joining us on TelecomTV again. You're a regular contributor to our shows and we do appreciate that. How about an update first of where we are with NFV work? What's the current status?
So, if you're talking about the industry, I think we're at some sort of a transition point where we're moving from, in a nutshell, we're moving from feasibility to realization, let's say. Mm-hmm. So, in many different aspects, people have sort of gotten over the skepticism phase, gotten over the does this work phase, and are now addressing the problems which need to be addressed to make all of this really operational.
But as more and more people and companies get involved in this work, there seems to be a growing number of different bodies, technical bodies, industry-wide bodies, geographically dispersed groups. How do you ensure that all this work is productive and maximised, and there's reduced overlap and we're not duplicating work effort?
Right. So that's certainly of concern when many different bodies start talking about the same things. Also, it creates confusion in our customers' minds, saying, you know, where should we be involved? And even all of our companies, the companies we work for, have the same question: where should we be involved? What we've tried to do, and I personally have been involved with this ETSI ISG effort from the very beginning, what we've tried to do is, since we sort of launched this phenomenon called NFV, we wanted to make sure that there's minimal confusion around this, and that we work in a collaborative, inclusive way. And so we have made an effort actually to reach out to the other organizations, and I should say it's been reciprocal. Other organizations have reached out to us to talk about collaboration, to talk about areas of work we can do without causing conflicts or confusion. It turns out that it's not really a problem which needs to be resolved. It's just agreeing on some specifics, because the ETSI body never set out to be a standards body, really. It set out to be a body where we define frameworks, architectural frameworks, we define requirements at whatever level, and use cases. So we say what needs to be done, and not specifying how things need to be done. A lot of the other typical SDO standards bodies are looking at solutions, looking at interface specifications, things down at the very detailed level to help realize this. So there's a natural division of labor, so to speak. And what we've been trying to do in our interactions with the various bodies is to articulate areas where they can help out to flesh out certain things. And in fact, this Friday, there's going to be an SDO workshop, which is between several of these organizations, ETSI ISG, 3GPP, TMF, and OPNFV, the new open source effort, to flesh some of this out. So I think we're trying to make sure that this kind of, the fact that many bodies are working on this is not a source of confusion. Rather, it's just a natural progression of where the work has arrived, what you need to do. No one body can do everything.
Do you think the telecoms industry, and specifically the communications service providers, are starting to see the benefits of the open source and open software communities?
Yes. So open source is quite unfamiliar to many operators. They're slowly coming to terms with it. Some operators are more familiar with others, those who have a more development history internally, who've already looked at this and know what it's about. Others are very far away from it and haven't had that exposure. But in the background, what has been happening is all the vendors and all the equipment suppliers and software suppliers are working in this space have been involved in open source and have been using a lot of open source components in their products anyway. So even though that was not apparent to the operators, it's there in the systems. And all that is happening now is it's rising to another level, so to speak, that previously it was little pieces of open source which were used and maybe some underlying platform things, but it was buried deep inside. And now what's happening is a lot of work in open source, largely around the cloud and network control, like ODL or OpenStack, have surfaced this to a level where it starts to get exposed. And so the good thing is a lot of the companies have already been looking at this, and some are more invested than others, of course. HP is definitely much more invested in open source. We've been advocates right from the beginning and are very heavily involved in all of these efforts. But many companies have now realized that rather than compete with each other about some of the basic stuff which systems need to do, it's better to collaborate and get that thing out of the way, done in a unified, open way so that everybody can use it, and concentrate on the real value-added pieces. So it's a way of multiplying your development resources, and all companies are strapped for resources, and they've realized this is a natural way to do it. So the engineering development community of people who are developing all of this stuff get it, and slowly their customers, the operators and others, are starting to understand what this is about. Operators don't necessarily need to be involved directly in open source efforts, but they can help provide requirements into them, guidance into what's priority and what's not. And they can work through vendors like HP and others. But there are some operators who are directly involved because they have part of what they're doing is internal development based on open source. So they are definitely involved directly.
And talking about the operators and the service providers, from your perspective, are you seeing sufficient collaboration and openness between operators?
Yeah, so this whole effort, the ETSI ISG, which we created, started with a group of operators. About half a dozen of us got together initially. Well, 2 of us first, and then half a dozen. And then when we launched the ETSI ISG, we were about 13. And now I think it's grown to 27 or something. I've lost track, but yeah, somewhere close to 30 operators worldwide who are part of this. And the reason they're part of this and they're still staying part of this is this notion of collaboration, because again, it's similar to why vendors are collaborating on open source. It's a very similar thing. That is, given the economics of the marketplace, given the competition all these operators face, and given rising costs in development, etc., if any one operator wants to get something developed specially for themselves, they will have to pay for that. And increasing that becomes an unbearable cost if you keep doing that. It's better to leverage something which is built commonly for multiple users so that the cost can be amortized over a larger group, and then you can add the bits and pieces you need to tweak. So I think that's what has brought the operators together, and that's what they hope to leverage. I mean, the operators themselves have different business priorities, different plans, different geographical and regulatory and legal constraints. But there's a core set of things all of them need to do and need to care about. And if that can be built in a common way, then it makes their life easier. So I don't see any reason why they wouldn't collaborate. And the thing is, just like the vendors themselves are collaborating in various spheres, despite the fact that they're competitors, it's the same thing with the operators. That perhaps the competition boundaries are less, a little more fluid there, but it's the same reason that there's a common base which everybody can agree on, and then if you want to compete, it's at the layers which you can differentiate without it's not part of this common effort.
Okay, so and the operators are looking towards the viability of NFV, and part of this process comes out of ETSI NFV, which is the proof of concepts. ETSI doing their own proof of concepts, and vendors such as yourself doing more proof of concepts. You're quite active in this, with about 24 or so proof of concepts.
That's right.
So far. How has that affected your partnership within the ecosystem and bringing new players in and supporting that? And how ultimately will that help and benefit the operators?
Right. So yes, we're involved in close to 24 POCs, as you say, worldwide, and almost all of these are directly with our customers and partners. And then in addition, we are involved in some of the ETSI proof of concepts. So again, this was a phase which started, a year ago or something, where we started to get involved in all of these, and this was the fleshing out period. But as we did that, we gained a lot of experience on how to put things together, how to build things, how to address the operator requirements, because all the proof of concepts we were involved in were driven by a customer need. And so the learning from that is what is helping us build solutions effectively. It's also helping us bring back, and it's helping others who are involved in proof of concepts to bring back to forums like this to validate the requirements, modify the requirements and architecture as needed, because until you do develop something and do put something together, what you've developed in a specific requirements or specification or requirements document is only paper, and it doesn't get fleshed out till you actually have some reality. Which sort of leads me to the other effort I'm involved in, this whole new open platform for NFV, OPNFV, which is a new open source effort we started in the fall last year, which I'm the chair of the board of directors for that. The reason some of us started this effort was that we wanted to accelerate the deployment and realization of the NFV approach. And we felt that the work going on in ETSI is good and has to be done, but we wanted to break away from the standardization model of spending a lot of time going through the requirements, getting down to all the detail, getting agreement and all that detail, and then getting to implementation, which would be a long time in the future. So we thought that a way to accelerate deployment, but not just deployment, accelerate implementations which are inherently interoperable, was to use the means of open source. That is, if we could get people to collaborate on building an underlay open source system, whose purpose was to serve the NFV use cases, then we could get interoperability de facto, so to speak, and accelerate this process. So that's the other thing which we're engaged in, which sort of is going beyond the proof of concepts, but it is related to it.
And that's progressing well?
That is progressing very well. It just was announced in September, so it's just been a couple of months really where we actually started doing some work. But we have, I think, I'm losing count now, but it's of the order of close to 50 members, 40 plus member companies, all the major companies you can think of. Over around 20, again, I may not have the exact numbers, but they're close to 20 platinum members who are on the board. It's a mix of carriers and other equipment vendors, software vendors, and other parties. I'd say the percentage of carriers to total number of companies is about the same as it's in ETSI. I mean, the numbers are different because it's smaller, but it's about the same. So there are major carriers among the board. And we're really trying to get this done. It's more of an integration project because the idea is not to create new code if you don't need it. So its idea is to use existing open source projects which are relevant, like OpenStack, like OpenDaylight, get that code integrated in for the purposes of NFV, and if find if we find missing pieces or missing functions or plugs, feed those back into those upstream communities to get fixed. So that's sort of the approach you're taking. And a lot of the people who started this have been involved in the ETSI ISG, so we're taking this knowledge of the requirements from here into that. So hopefully what is built addresses the architectures and requirements from here. So yeah, it's been going well so far. There are about close to a dozen projects ongoing, and several more being proposed. So
Well,
this community is growing.
best of luck with Open NFV. Pradeep, thank you
you.
very much indeed, and we'll see you again at the next ETSI meeting, no doubt. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.